All right. Hello and welcome. Thank you for tuning in to Virtual Coffee with Ben. My name is Ben Blackman. I'm the Director of Development for Ridge. That's Royal Innovation Design Group, a group of innovation consultants based in St. Petersburg, Florida. Before we get started, as always, I want to encourage everybody out there to go to the Ridge YouTube channel on our Facebook page. You can hit the like button, share our content. You can also schedule your very own Coffee with Ben session. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to be on the show, although we'd love to have you. We can just have a little chat about how Ridge can help your company innovate more effectively. The show, however, does talk about how companies strategically plan for the future and create a strong culture for their employees. And I'm super excited to welcome our guest this morning. His name is Matt Broffman. He is the Director of Innovation for the City of Orlando, where he focuses on digital transformation projects that enhance the resident experience. More importantly, he's a dear friend of mine, I think 17 years strong. We met freshman year at the University of Missouri, and he's actually the man that introduced me to some crazy little website called Google way back when. I'm not sure if you remember that, but you were the first person to tell me about Google. And here we are 17 years later. It's hard to believe it's been that long, but thanks for joining me this morning, Matt.
Yes, it's crazier and crazier as we get older. Like the stories of like, oh, I introduced you to, it used to be like, okay, it was like Facebook, and now it's like, okay,
Yeah.
we're going back to Google.
Yeah, Facebook, Google, all that stuff. Well, Matt, although you went to Mizzou, you're actually a Florida native, and you made the decision to return back home after college and started working for the city of Orlando about 6 years ago. I'm curious, what was it about the opportunity to work for the city that really appealed to you? And I'm also curious how your role has changed or evolved over the 6 years that you've been there.
Yeah, I think like a lot of people probably who grew up in Florida, right, whether that's in Tampa or Orlando, I think there was this desire to like get away and go to a big city, and I certainly had that desire after graduating from Mizzou, and ended up with a great job offer in Orlando, and kind of said, all right, I'll take it for a year, and then I'm going to leave and go to Chicago, New York, or San Francisco. And the Orlando that I grew up in is not the Orlando that it is today, and I fell back in love with Orlando and made a commitment that I'm going to stay here and raise my family in Orlando. But when the kind of opportunity came around, was talking to the mayor's office about working for the city. The director of innovation or chief innovation officer, it was only in one or two other cities at the time, really. And we thought that with a focusing mayor like Mayor Dyer, it would be a great opportunity to really propel forward on a lot of these unique projects. The role has evolved. I mean, I have to be very clear. When I took the job, I don't think I had a clear indication of what a director of innovation was going to do. I don't know that Mayor Dyer had a explicit here's exactly what I want you to do, and we find that across the country. There's almost 100 of us now across the globe. We chat regularly. We actually just had a video call yesterday with a big cohort of us, and everybody's role is a little bit different, but the consistent kind of pieces are that it's not set out right, and it's about solving tough problems. And so I was faced with a unique spot in Orlando where we have a mayor who's this big picture innovation kind of mayor. And we've got these great projects that have happened, from Sunrail to our new Dr. Phillips Performing Arts Center to revitalizing downtown, right? All these huge things that we've done as a city and the mayor's led out on. And so it kind of reversed where my role, we focused more on what are those resident interactions like? And so we've really built out a customer experience team at the city that focuses on what are those resident interactions that people have with government, right? So whether that's getting a permit, reporting a pothole, whatever it might be, and how do we enhance those experiences to make them better? Because the trust that we build in those experiences that allows us to go out and do these big cool projects and to solve these really tough problems, right? I mean, right now, policing is a challenge, right? And Orlando just announced early this week we're gonna relook at some how we respond to our 911 calls, right? The residents trust that will let you do things like that is because you pick up the trash every day, right? Like if you weren't doing a good job picking people's trash up as a city, you're not going to be able to try these new things. And so we've really focused our role on how do we build trust by having positive interactions.
That's awesome. I know you've been really passionate about digital transformation and using those platforms. You talked about some of the examples that you've already done. I'm curious, give us a little more detail about how you've really enhanced the resident experience, how you've measured that, more importantly, to know that what you're doing is really making an impact.
Yeah, I think one of the things people don't get unless you work in a city, right? I came from the private sector, and everywhere I've worked, we had a product portfolio, right? This like small amount of easily described products or services you offer, right? And depending on startups sometimes struggle to describe it well, but it's kind of well contained. as a city, we have over 350 different services we offer residents, and they are across the board. And so the biggest challenge was walking in and realizing, this isn't about, doing a digital transformation project for a given product or service or portfolio, right? You have to go through, each one is different. And so up until we started doing this, the way that cities approached it was to kind of pick a problematic service or a high volume service and focus on it. And what we saw happening in Boston and Austin and Philadelphia is you'd spend 3 years on how to report a lost pet, right? And like, well, that's super important, right? There's a lot of other services to get to. So our approach was done is better than perfect. And so we went through and created an innovation, really a transformation workshop that allowed staff in 3 days to really redesign their entire service online and get it launched. And so we were able to get through the 350. Were they perfect at the end of it? No, but every single one of them was better than where it started. And now, to your point, what we're able to do is measure, right? So we have customer experience follow-up surveys that happen for these services. So we're finding out from our residents, how satisfied are they? How much do they trust the city? And that then allows us to realize where the challenges are and go after that, right? So some areas maybe not performing as well as we thought they should, and we can spend the time, the 2 to 3 months to focus just on that service to make it better. But we kind of wanted to get everybody up to a baseline, and so that transformation was about explaining things clearly online, right? The biggest challenge government faces is we use complex language. We have a bunch of rules. I mean, we are a regulatory world that we live in, and most digital transformation projects, think about it, they focus on this should be so easy to use. You don't have to have instructions, right? If you think about the way you should be able to walk through Uber. Uber doesn't have a pop-up page, although I think they're using more of these now. But Uber doesn't have a pop-up page that explains how you book a ride, right? Like you just start and you can make your way through the whole process. We're not that lucky in government, right? There's like all these rules that have to happen. So we actually now have a standard practice. We explain the whole process up front in a very clear, plain language way, so that you know what to expect. Then we want to design an easy to use interaction, and then we want to have that follow-up experience happen throughout. And so we kind of hold to those core components when we're doing digital transformation in government. And that really has set us aside differently than I think a lot of these other cities that have spent, millions of dollars really hiring consultants to come in and, redesign a service, but you end up with, 5 services or 15 services when you've got 350 to actually do. And relatively speaking, we're not a large city, right? Some of these larger cities have even more services to tackle.
Yeah. You kind of hit on this, but I'm curious how you and your peers there at the City of Orlando approach innovation. You talked about, done is better than perfect. Great philosophy. You're casting a really wide net with 350 projects. How are you guys structured? I'm sure that's constantly changing. Are you constantly getting feedback from the residents on what they'd like to see? And then, given that in 2020, the pandemic has kind of taken everybody's focus away from their day-to-day stuff, like how have you had to change in response to the pandemic in terms of what kind of innovations you're putting together, or just how you're working with your peers? Have you had to do everything remotely? Has that posed any challenges for you guys?
Yeah, I think doing innovation remotely, I think everybody who does this knows that it is challenging, right? I think one of the if an innovation group with a city has no output, right? If there was no whiz bang thing or great experience that came out of an innovation group, it doesn't mean they're a failure in cities, because a huge role that innovation in cities and a lot of organizations, their responsibility is really that cross department collaboration. And so I think when we look at what value we provide, a huge value we provide to the city is helping our departments realize they share similar challenges, right? And they share similar problems, and they can work together to solve those. And when you can't be in the same room, it is really difficult to do that. So we've had to adapt, but I think what we have found, for us was the pandemic really highlighted the work that we were doing. Again, we were really fortunate when the pandemic hit. We had 350 services online, so we were able to easily go in, figure out which ones still had in-person components, adjust those, work with the staff to fix that, and move forward. Whereas I think a lot of cities at that point were, focused on, okay, how do we even figure out what services we're offering in person, and starting from that point. So we were in a really good spot there. I think our work has transformed. We were doing a lot more digital feedback, right? So we use Qualtrics as our CX platform, and so we have, I think I was just looking at this, we've got 15 different research projects underway right now, for asking residents for feedback on different things, right? So it might be business owners in a certain area asking for feedback on, how safe they feel. We're working on, our downtown core park at Lake Eola, getting feedback from residents on what they like or don't like and what they want to see changed for that park as part of the master planning process. We've got all these different types of projects that we're doing where I think normally we'd rely on neighborhood meetings, right? We'd host a meeting and we'd get feedback. We're doing it more digitally. And I think what is important to remember, especially for the public sector, is people tend to criticize digital feedback because of the digital divide, right? There's a lot of people that don't necessarily have access. But the reality is when we hosted a neighborhood meeting, there are a lot of people that can't make the meeting, that didn't know about the meeting, that don't have a car to get there, that don't necessarily always live in the area, that are working at that, right? There's a lot of reasons why neighborhood meetings are also not the most successful. And so the nice thing about digital feedback is we collect demographics, and so we're able to easily tell what areas are missing. And so when it's not perfect, we actually know it's not perfect and we can account for that. So we were just looking at the results from one of our feedback, and it was very clear that there were certain areas of feedback that were missing it. And so now we're going to send people out, to flyer in neighborhoods, to send mailers out to those neighborhoods to really make sure we're getting feedback from across the city. So I'm thrilled with that. We've been forced to go more digital, and that has forced us to figure out how to adapt and make digital more inclusive for everyone.
Mhm. That's awesome. Well, I kind of buried the lead here a little bit. Aside from the fact that I've always wanted to have you on the show, the timing is perfect because you guys just had a huge announcement. There's a partnership between a German-based company called Lilium and the city of Orlando, which will put Lilium's first U.S. location for an on-demand air taxi service at the nearby Lake Nona area. What can you tell us about how this deal came about and how or why they ultimately decided to put it in Orlando?
Yeah, we, about 3 years ago, we are talking with Mayor Dyer, and we're really looking at Uber and Lyft. And if you kind of think about how Uber and Lyft came to be, there was about a year and a half where everyone could see that this was going to happen, right? It was starting in some cities. They were doing, and cities for the most part did nothing, right? We didn't know what to do and did nothing, and then all of a sudden they showed up, and it was disruptive, right? I mean, you could argue on who was right, who was wrong, but it was disruptive.
Yes.
And that technology was disruptive to cities. And so Mayor Dyer said, what's the next thing that's going to disrupt us, and how do we start planning for that now? And so we spent a lot of time looking at that, and very clear to us that this advanced air mobility, as I think we're now all starting to call it, industry is going to be disruptive to cities, to regions, to states, really to the transportation network overall. And so 3 years ago, we launched a project to figure out what that means. And let me be very clear. 3 years later, I think all the partners that we've talked to would argue, we're probably one of the leading cities when it comes to thought leadership on this and thinking about that. We still don't have any of the answers, right? And I think the reality is the way to get the answers is to be the city that has a seat at the table and participating in this. And so Mayor Dyer has made it very clear that we're going to lean in and we're going to be part of this, even though we don't know what it's going to look like, so that we can figure that out, right? So we've been working on that. We've been talking to there are dozens of companies out there that have potentially viable options for how this can look in cities and regions, and at the same time, which we finally figured out, but we didn't know about. Tavistock Development, which is the builder and developer of Lake Nona, was also looking at this project, and so we kind of joined forces with them and really decided on Lilium for a variety of reasons. One, they've got an aircraft that we think is viable to make it to market pretty quickly here. Two, they've got a great model when it comes to being regionally focused, right? So they're not just in the short term focused on getting people around a given city, but connecting Orlando to other cities like Tampa or St. Pete. And so we think that model works really well as a starting point. And so we're excited that Lilium chose Orlando as the hub, the first hub in the United States. And we're excited to see kind of where other cities have vertiports announced, because we know there's been a lot of conversations in the news in Tampa. The idea of connecting, cities to cities is, going to change the way that people think about jobs, with people think about the economy, and even going out, right? Like, I mean, the ability for, if there was a Tampa connection, for somebody to walk over to the vertiport, let's say in downtown Tampa, hop on and have a 30-minute flight to get to downtown Orlando to watch a concert at the Amway Center,
Mhm.
right? Or vice versa. Somebody can, Orlando hops on and can be at the beach in St. Pete in 30 minutes and spend the afternoon, or the weekend at the beach, and come back on a 30-minute flight. That's transformational, especially as costs go down, right? So pilots will be involved. I think some people don't see pilots will be involved in the short term,
Mhm.
but in the long term, there'll be autonomy in the skies, and the cost will go down tremendously. And so, it can be really inexpensive to travel from city to city. And so, I think there will be a day where you could live in Tampa and work in Orlando, and that your commute is walking 2 blocks to your vertiport if you live downtown, and then taking a 30-minute flight to get to a different city to go to work. And when you think about what that opens up for jobs and access, and also where people can live, right? I think that's going to really, really change the way that we think about transportation.
That's incredible. Is there any kind of timetable in terms of when this will actually launch?
Yeah, so Lilium has shared publicly that they want to have multiple networks up and running across the globe by 2025. So I think I'd put 2025 as the marker on your calendar when Lilium, and look, there are others out there that are also saying they're going to do it by 2025. That seems to kind of be the target date. But we'll have to see how things develop between now and then. That's 5 years away at this point, 4 years away pretty soon here. And I think 4 years feels like a long way off, but when you've got regulatory approvals, that timetable, we'll start seeing very quickly, right? We got to get sign-offs on a vertiport in Orlando, right? That's not just the city approving it, but
Mhm.
that's FDOT, FAA approving it, and then you've got to, get a permit to build it, right? Then you've got to build it. And, I mean, there's a lot of things that have to play out between now and that time, and so I think it's why you're starting to see these announcements. And I think anybody who's trying to operate by 2025 but hasn't kind of picked locations yet is probably behind the eight ball. If you want to start, it's going to take you, 2 to 3, maybe 4 years to actually build and get all these approvals. So we'll start seeing, I'd be surprised, Tavistock has announced, part of the announcement was that they're going to be building vertiports, other vertiports in the state of Florida. So I would say in the next, 6 months to a year, you'll be seeing announcements about where some of these other network locations are going to be in Florida. And hopefully someday I'll be able to hop on a Lilium jet in the not too distant future and come visit you.
Yeah, that'd be great. If you're just joining us out there, you're watching Virtual Coffee with Ben. I'm Ben Blackman. I'm the Director of Development for Ridge, that's Royal Innovation Design Group. And I'm joined today by Matt Broffman. He's the Director of Innovation for the City of Orlando. Again, if you like what you're hearing, you want more content, you can go to the Ridge YouTube channel or Facebook page, and stay tuned for more conversations just like this one every Wednesday morning. Matt, you mentioned a lot the mayor of Orlando, Buddy Dyer, somebody who is obviously very focused on innovation, very open to new ideas. He said that this new on-demand taxi service could really reshape the transportation ecosystem and benefit Orlando residents long term. You talked about some of the impacts already. You talked about creating new jobs. I'm assuming having this taxi service reduces pollution and things like that. Have you looked at other ways that this might impact the city? Does this now put you kind of at the forefront of maybe other technologies that would want to piggyback on this? Is there kind of a snowball effect in terms of seeing Orlando now as like, hey, this is the place that we got to do everything?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple pieces, right? So from an economic development standpoint, no one region owns this advanced air mobility ecosystem space, right? There's a lot of work, as always, happening out in California. But we think there's a great opportunity to make Central Florida and Florida really be the home for advanced air mobility. We've got, not a week goes by where we aren't talking to an advanced air mobility company that is interested in the work that we're doing. And so, we've already got what people probably don't know is in Central Florida, we already have a tremendous amount of aerospace engineering talent, right? Between what you've got out at Cape Canaveral, also to what Lockheed Martin, who has a major presence in Central Florida, has, and then the modeling and simulation work that happens out by UCF, and then not to mention, we have, I think, one of the largest hubs for simulation training for pilots, right? So if you're a JetBlue pilot, you're coming to Orlando to get trained sometime over the next year or 2 years, or however often you have to do your training, because JetBlue has their training headquarters. We have Simcom, which is headquartered in Orlando, which is one of the largest pilot simulation companies. And so there's a lot of aerospace work that already happens in Orlando. So we think this kind of bolts on nicely to that. And so our hope is that there's going to be headquarters that need to be built for these companies somewhere. There's going to be these maintenance facilities and final assembly facilities that have to be built somewhere in North America, right? Because you're going to have to bring the parts here and assemble them, and then maintain them. So we think there's a lot of economic development opportunities. I think it's still too early to know where all that's going to play out, but it's certainly important for a city to kind of raise our hand and take a proactive approach to that, and so we're doing that. I think in terms of transforming transportation, I think it's important to note that it really competes with other forms of transportation, right? Like, yes, it's cool, and so we'll all want to. But that's not why it's going to be successful, right? It's going to be successful because of what it takes. So if you think about rail, which is probably the closest competitor to this, right? Rail requires billions of dollars of investment to connect two cities, right? So we look at what Brightline is doing from Orlando to Miami. It's billions of dollars. That's with a B. To put two vertiports is under $100 million. Right. And so the ability to start adding cities, right, you can do that way quicker. The other reality is the land that you need, right? So if I want to get from Tampa to Orlando, as we're seeing with Brightline, there's a lot of land acquisition that has to happen, and then construction that has to happen in that land. And when you get into neighborhoods, nobody wants to have rail run through their city, right? Maybe you want it to stop in your city, but you certainly don't want it to run through your city. With advanced air mobility, you're flying above cities, and so you don't have that same problem. And there's also an equity component of that, right? Highways and rail have for a long time divided our communities. And so to be able to have this transportation network that does not require this infrastructure that will divide communities, I think is really important. And I think what we'll also see is, as when this is true for rail, but not for highways, the problem with highways is you build an exit, every mile or so. And so you get this kind of sprawl that really doesn't have centers. I think advanced air mobility, people are going to want to be near these vertiports. And so as they get built, there'll be more economic activity near vertiports, but they can kind of be spread out across the state, for example, and not be reliant necessarily on where highways are. Nothing is more frustrating for me. I don't live out in Northwest Florida, but they're building this huge highway, or they want to build this huge highway to connect Northwest Florida. Well, I think we all want to be connected from a transportation perspective. I think that money would be better spent on something like advanced air mobility, which will provide that same connectivity, to Northwest Florida. So I think we'll once it's proven, instead of, say, the state legislature looking at how do we build a highway in Northwest Florida, if that conversation was happening 10 years from now, I think they'd be saying, how do we build a bunch of vertiports in Northwest Florida to make sure we have this connectivity? I think we'll see it. We aren't looking tremendously at it, but cargo, there's ability to deliver packages. We've talked with our hospitals, life safety medical supplies are oftentimes spread out across the state. And so to be able to very quickly on demand, be able to get things to people is going to be super important. And, obviously passenger transportation as well for life safety. So I think there's going to be a lot of what they kind of call mission profiles that will come out of the work that we're doing. But right now we're focused on how do we kind of connect city to city, and then a little bit within our city, right? So how do we get someone from the airport to their final destination within the city?
Really exciting stuff, and I can't wait to watch how it all unfolds. It seems like the Jetsons is finally becoming a reality, and I appreciate you giving us an insight into kind of what's going on and the plans there. As someone who, I know you always kind of have your finger on the pulse in terms of emerging innovations and technology, I'm curious just in general, not necessarily as it relates to your role, but are there certain trends that you're keeping your eye on for 2021 and beyond? What are you focused on just in terms of the technology that's out there?
I think we're going to see a continued push for customer experience. So I think, there's a lot of talk of AI and chatbots and all that kind of stuff. And I think that is great. I think the primary driver is going to continue to be customer experience. And so I think we've seen private sector really go after how do you remove friction for buying, how do you improve the long term net promoter score and CX for customers. And I think that is going to continue to be really important. I think the piece that goes with that we're already starting to see a lot of companies focus on is employee experience. When COVID hit, I think the amount of probably feedback and surveys that were sent to employees probably increased 10x. Right, we did it at the city. Right, we wanted to know, okay, we aren't seeing you every day. How are you doing? And I think that's going to be really important, because the number one thing that determines whether or not customers are happy is whether or not employees are happy. Because if employees aren't happy, they're not providing good customer experience. So I think we're going to see a lot of work there. And I think I think the remove these screenless technologies will continue to proliferate, right? So the Google Homes, Amazon Alexas, those type of things. And so I think people will start figuring out how do you, it's not about a chatbot for support. It's about a chatbot that quickly lets you do things. I think the big question for me is how much is driven by the Googles of the world, right? So is it going to be that Google has like as they're doing right now, where they're going to do restaurant reservations and Google kind of handles that, or are there going to be companies that somehow figure out how to better plug into that to drive that? So I think that's going to be the big piece. And then I think how do you market those things? We've done a really, I think, as globally we've done a really bad job of marketing and getting people used to this new world, right? I think if you like, the number one thing people do on their Google Home is like ask it questions that you're arguing with your spouse about, right? It's not about using these services. And maybe getting news, right? Like I think NPR of all and New York Times has done a good job, right? We all, or a lot of us, will say, okay, Google, tell me the news, but we're not really, I don't know about you, but I haven't, made a restaurant reservation via Google, and it's not that I don't know that I can, I just don't know that I know that it's better or easier, right? So I think there's a huge bar to get to there. So those are the things that I'm keeping my eye on as we head into 2021. I think there'll still be a lot of buzz around that.
Always fascinating to get your take on that. Well, before we wrap up, we do what we call the Benny Good Times Fast Five. It's 5 quick questions, get to know you a little bit better on a personal level. Of course, I know you, but we want to make sure the audience gets to know Matt Broffman a little bit better. My first question is, what is your favorite thing about the Orlando area?
My favorite thing about Orlando, I'd say the creativity. I think we have more artists per capita in Orlando than I think any city except LA. And that is because of our theme parks. And I think, we look at our theme parks and oftentimes we're trying to, our huge campaign was, you don't know the other half of it, right? Which is like, there's this other half of Orlando. I think, the theme parks, I haven't gone to a theme park in probably a year and a half, but they're still a huge part of our culture, right? And so I just went to this holiday event, socially distanced holiday event, and there was, it was free, and there was this amazing show written by some local guy who I'm fairly certain writes shows for Disney and Universal, right? So you just get this great creativity. We've got one of the longest running and largest fringe theater festivals in the world. Why? Because we've got all these artists that are here. And so there's a tremendous amount of creativity that exists in Orlando. Even if it's not, out there on iDrive when you go out to the attractions, it's in our downtown and in our different art scene.
That's great. Love Orlando. So if I'm giving you a free ticket to travel anywhere in the world in a non-COVID environment, where would you go? Any destination on your list?
My right now, oddly enough, but right now, like Australia, I'm super fascinated with Australia. I think the geography there, more and more work wise, we're looking at a lot of things that cities in Australia are doing, and it's been really fascinating to see what Australia looks like. And it's a place that I've never, it's somewhere I've never been, and I'd love to kind of take a trip there. It's just a matter of that bearing with that like incredibly long flight.
Yes, it does. As somebody who did it pre-COVID, it is an extremely long flight, but also very well worth it. So yeah, hopefully you get that chance sooner than later. Question 3 is, what is your favorite movie?
My favorite movie, which has been my favorite movie for a long time, and I haven't seen it probably now in years, but The Truman Show. Probably because I feel like I had that idea before, and Ben, I feel like we had this conversation in college. But I think it's a fascinating idea, and I think more and more as we've gotten into reality television, it's almost surprising that actually hasn't played out. Yeah, I think that as a premise, the kind of meta of being in a movie and a TV show and a movie is interesting.
And shot in Florida, at least part of it.
And shot in Florida, and good luck, proving to me that it's not true and not happening right now, right?
I know. Yeah, I think you thought it was happening to you, that you might actually be the star of the show. So it could be.
There you go.
I might
There you
just
go.
be an
Could be.
actor in your movie. We'll see.
Right.
Uh, so
That
Matt, if I had to put you on a stage on a talent show and just say, hey, you got to perform for everyone, what would you do?
I'd be screwed. I think I am passionate about so many things and love doing so many things. I'm not good at anything to go on a stage for. Right. Like I think maybe I could bartend or make coffee. Were the two things I enjoy doing for other people, but certainly probably not even good enough to work at Starbucks. Yeah, I'd be screwed. Maybe I could teach people how to groom mustaches right now. That's probably
I
my
was gonna
latest
say,
hobby.
yeah, something with a mustache. You got it. And then finally, who is your biggest hero or inspiration and why?
Not to be silly, but my mom, it's just is the easy way out, but it's true. I mean, I was one of three boys. Mom raised us as a single mother, and I think I always greatly appreciate that. But having a 6-year old running around the house and raising one child with another parent is incredibly difficult. And so the fact that she did that with three kids and did such a great job, in my opinion. And continues to be involved in our life and in my son's life, and so I think that's worthy of hearing this.
Yeah, always a good answer to pick mom. Well, before we wrap up, I want to give you an opportunity. Where can people go to find out more about the work that you and your peers are doing at the City of Orlando, more about the Lillian Project? Where can you direct people to?
Yeah, so I think best thing, follow the City of Orlando on LinkedIn, which is where we post a lot of these updates, or on any other social media. Interesting learning about the work that we're doing for advanced air mobility. We'll be posting it there. We're going to hopefully launch a web page on the Orlando Economic Development Council that will kind of highlight some of the news that's been happening in the industry here in Orlando. And then you can find me on LinkedIn, Twitter, at Matt Broffman. And we do a pretty good job, hopefully, of sharing it out.
Absolutely. Well, that's how I found out about this exciting news. And so I want to thank you again for hopping on and giving us an update on all the great work that you guys are doing. Best of luck to everything that you're doing moving forward. Again, if you're interested in learning more about Ridge, you can go to our website, which is ridge.com. That's RIDG.com. And hopefully you'll join us again next Wednesday for the next episode of Coffee with Ben. But I want to thank once again our guest today, Matt Broffman, Director of Innovation, City of Orlando. Thanks so much, Matt. It was a pleasure speaking with you, catching up. Hope you and everyone in Orlando are doing well, and we will see you next time.
Thanks, man. Always great.
Yeah, take care.